I can understand there's really strongly passionate feelings about this kind of thing. That isn't, to me, it is not about what my own opinion is on this. It's a question of whether or not it is right to cancel a session like this because people get offended at the topic matter. And the immediate answer from me is no. It is absolutely not right to do that. And why is that? We're talking about scientific disciplines. Anthropology being one of them, archaeology being one of them, go down the list. What is the purpose of science as a whole? To get at the truth. But to do that, under that organized skepticism principle, you must have contesting viewpoints. You must have viewpoint diversity. Got a bit of a hot button issue because there's a case of professional societies, and aside from universities, professional societies are the other thing I end up talking about because they do end up shaping things with respective scientific disciplines and what have you. And this is an interesting case, as you might guess, coming from Colin Wright, evolutionary biologist, writing on X, better known as Twitter. X is a shitty name as far as I'm concerned, but anyway, whatever. Anyway, I want to make a comment more so on the overarching issue of canceling panels. In this case, when it is likely not appropriate to do so. But before we begin, and before I totally forget, are you a member of Wokescreen yet? Wokescreen is a pretty dang awesome place. They're working to build out a place for the building of culture to counter some of the things that we are seeing today, with some very interesting things such as the crowdsourced podcast, the editorial, the dead drop dialect, and more being added all the time in here, like the community Discord behind the scenes. If you're a member like I am, you can actually get yourself involved here in Wokescreen to see things like crowdsource here behind the scenes. You see this is members only right here is what you see behind the scenes. You get free access to all of this live if you're a member. Here you can also get the editorial, where you get the written versions, if you prefer, of the main stories here, and some very nuanced takes, which I very much appreciate in this world of tribal butting heads like nothing else. So I encourage you to become a member of Wokescreen. You can use my link in the description, or go to wokescreen.com and use my promo code ScioSophia to get 10% off your membership. That's wokescreen.com, promo code ScioSophia to get 10% off your membership. Now back to the content of this video. So, Colin Wright writes on I'm sorry, I can't say it, Twitter. The American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropology Society have canceled the panel, quote, "Let's talk about sex, baby. Why biological sex remains a necessary analytic category in anthropology," scheduled to take place at their annual conference. The reasons given for the cancellation was that the panel conflicted with their values, compromised the, quote, "safety and dignity of our members," and diminished the program's scientific integrity. They claimed the ideas in the panel was planning to advance, i.e. sex is a real and scientifically important biological variable, would cause, quote, "cause harm to members of the members represented by the," God, that's such awful phrasing. "Members represented by the trans," and the phrasing of the language there is bad. Anyway, phrasing, "cause harm to members represented by the trans and LGBTQI of the anthropological community, as well as the community at large. The AAA and KESCA," careful you don't add another T to, well, you could add something to that acronym and it would not be a very, very good acronym. Anyway, "have vowed to, quote, undertake a major review of the processes associated with vetting sessions at our annual meetings to ensure that such discussion panels about the reality and importance of sex will not be improved in the future." Now, this is obviously Colin Wright writing, so it is in large part his opinion. But the more basic thing, of course, is that they canceled a session at a major conference because people complained about harm. Now, it is important to note in this context that Jonathan Rauch writes about this in The Constitution of Knowledge, and if you have not read it, I highly recommend it. It's a very good book. Very much details the Western Enlightenment philosophy and how it has worked and worked very well in the production of knowledge, as well as mediation of different disputes and things along that line. Um, and what one of the things he talks about that undermines that is what's called emotional safetyism. Um, and that is oftentimes what is meant here when we're talking about harm. Is actually emotional safetyism. It essentially, makes me very upset. I get offended by this thing, therefore you cannot have it. It causes me distress emotionally, therefore you cannot have it. And that is undermining of free speech for sure. So let me see here. I want to put one thing up if I can find it real quick because I think it's actually quite relevant, and that is the Chicago Statement of Free Expression, which frankly I don't think should apply to just universities or the Princeton Principles. I don't think they should just apply to universities. I think very much that they should apply to professional societies, and I think they should very much apply to science as a whole, in the discipline sense, not in the process sense of getting at the truth. Yeah. Um, So let's see. Is that it? Where is it? I'm trying to. There we go. Is that it? Yes, the Chicago Statement. Before I totally forgot, I'm going to put that in here just to make. Oh my goodness, lordy, that came out too big. No. Where is it? Where's the zoom? Oh dear. Hold on. There we go. Much better. So in this, there is a section in here which is actually really relevant to this. Let's see. The words of Harper, Hutchins, Levi, and Gray capture both the spirit and promise of the University of Chicago. Because the university is committed to free and open inquiry in all matters, it guarantees all members of the university community the broadest possible latitude to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn. Except insofar as limitations on that freedom are necessary to the functioning of the University of Chicago fully respects and supports the freedom of all members of the university community to discuss any problem that presents itself. Of course, the ideas of different members of the university community will often and quite naturally conflict. But it is not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions that they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. Although the university greatly values civility, and although all members of the university community share in the responsibility for maintaining a climate of mutual respect, concerns about civility and mutual respect can never be used as a justification for closing off discussion of ideas, however offensive or disagreeable those ideas may be to some members of our community. So, there is some strict limitations, but those limitations as highlighted here count to, defamation, violations of existing law, all those kinds of things, like incitement to violence would be a violation of existing law. Those kinds of things. Those are incompatible. But being deeply offended does not count in one of that. So if the different societies, such as in this case the American Anthropological Society, or Association rather, geez, I'm criminy, the AAA, were acting under the Chicago Principles, or as I prefer, the Princeton Principles, which very similar but in extension and shall we say a bit more strict and actually more specific on certain things, which I think is a very good thing. But in other words, if you're talking about free expression and freedom of thought, if we were to apply the Chicago Statement to professional societies, which, for those of you listening, and I know there's a bunch of STEM folks who are senior up there who are listening probably, there would be in one thing to do. See if we cannot get the professional societies to adopt the Chicago Statement or the Princeton Principles. And see to it that they get some enforcement behind them. Because stuff like this is inappropriate. Being deeply offended is not an excuse for canceling a meeting, canceling a session or panelists or anything like that. But here is the letter. Dear panelists, we write to inform you that at the request of numerous members, the respective boards of the AAA and Casca reviewed the panel submission, Let's Talk About Sex, Baby, Why Biological Sex Remains a Necessary Analytic Category in Anthropology, and reached a decision to remove the session from the AAA Casca 2023 conference program. I've seen this Emmy thing here before. I don't know why it's there. Something weird about that. This decision was based on extensive consultation, was reached in the spirit of respect for our values, the safety and dignity of our members, and the scientific integrity of the program. The reason the session deserved further scrutiny was that ideas were advanced in such a way as to cause harm to members represented by the trans LGBTQI of the anthropological community, as well as the community at large. While were those who disagree with this decision, we would hope they know their voice was heard and was very much part of part of the conversation. I question that, but there's no way to know for sure, so I just leave that one as a question. It is our hope that we continue to work together so that we become stronger and more unified within each of our associations. Going forward, we will undertake a major review of the processes associated with vetting sessions at our annual meetings, and we'll include our leadership in that discussion. So they don't say straight up that they're, unlike what Colin says here, they don't say straight up that, we're not going to allow this kind of thing in the future. But I think that's the underlying implicit assumption. And again, look, I can understand that it offends people. Really, I can understand that. That is not appropriate justification for getting rid of a meeting, for getting rid of a session. It's a panel session, and I'll tell you something about these conferences and how they work for the most part, for those of you who are unfamiliar. A lot of times you will have these kinds of big society conferences that are put on have multiple sessions going on at the same time. So in other words, you got the freedom to pick and choose whatever the heck you want to attend, and oftentimes I run into the problem myself of there being sessions over here and sessions over here, and I want to go to both because they're both interesting, but I can't be in two places at once until, clone myself kind of thing. So this is often why going with colleagues is helpful. You kind of split up and go into different things, and then you can tell each other what you thought. So there's things like that, but yeah, this is not appropriate. It's not appropriate to remove a session because some people were offended, and that's probably what we're talking about, is the emotional safetyism aspect, as noticed by Jonathan Rausch. Don't get me wrong, there's lots of things I get pissed and offended at, and just like I don't demand to be canceled. The panelists responded to the sudden cancellation of this scheduled panel discussion, expressing their disappointment that the AAA and CASCA have chosen to forbid scholarly dialogue on this topic. They also firmly rejected the false accusation that to support the continued use of biological sex categories is to imperil the safety of the LGBTQI community. Panelists say that the suggestion that the panel would compromise the scientific integrity of the program is particularly egregious, noting that, on the contrary, the decision to anathemize our panel looks very much like an anti-science response to a politicized lobbying campaign. Finally, the panelists claimed that the AAA's and CASCA's attempt to chill future debate on this topic represents their words, not mine, declaration of war on dissent and on scholarly controversy, and a profound betrayal of their stated commitment to, quote, advance human understanding and apply this understanding to the world's most pressing problems. So here is the letter itself. In that, let's see. We are disappointed that the American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropology Society have chosen to forbid scholarly dialogue at the important joint conference themed Transitions to be held in Toronto in November. Our panel, Let's Talk About Sex Baby, Why Biological Sex Remains a Necessary Analytic Category in Anthropology, was accepted July 13th, 2023, after the submission was reviewed by the AAA Section Program Chairs or by CASCA's Scientific Committee. From the time of this acceptance until we received your letter dated September 25th, 2023, no one from AAA or CASCA reached out to any of the panelists with concerns. See, that is the other thing. There could have been a compromise. There could have perhaps been a compromise. Doubtful. Thus, it comes as a shock to all of us that the AAA and CASCA canceled the panel due to the false accusation that, quote, the ideas were advanced in such a way to cause harm to members represented by the trans and LGBTQI of the anthropological community. That is such weird phrasing. As well as the community at large. Due to the serious nature of the allegation, we hope that, rather than maintaining secrecy, the AAA and CASCA will share with us and its membership documentation about the exact sources and nature of these complaints and the correspondence that led to this decision. In other words, to say there was no due process. There's an accusation made and there was no due process involved with those accused, which is also pretty bad. But to the best that I can tell, and again, put forward evidence, right? To the best that I can tell, is it does seem like harm here is the emotional safetyism thing. But to that end, we are puzzled at the AAA Casca adopting as its own official stance that to support the continued use of biological sex categories, e.g., male and female, man and woman, is to imperil the safety of the LGBTQI community. Our panel description, written by Catherine Lowry, acknowledges that not all anthropologists need to differentiate between sex and gender. One of the abstracts explicitly expresses concern that ignoring the distinction between sex and gender identity may cause harm to people in the LGBTQI community. In No Bones About It, Skeletons Are Binary, People May Not Be, Elizabeth Weiss wrote, in forensics, however, anthropologists should be and are working on ways to ensure that skeletal finds are identified by both biological sex and their gender identity, which is essential due to the current rise in transitioning individuals. Which is to say, the panel was actually somewhat on their side of an argument. That's interesting by itself. Okay, that's interesting by itself. I gotta say, they actually seem to have a very balanced and interesting panel that was going on. Catherine Lowry was key in bringing the panel together and in defining our unifying theme. Our panel included a group of diverse women, one of whom is a lesbian. Not entirely relevant, but okay. In addition to having 3 fields of anthropology represented on our panel also included anthropologists from 4 countries with 3 languages, an international panel concerned about the erasure of women. Spanish anthropologist Silvia Carrasco planned to present data that looked at sex-based oppression, violence, and exploitation, and the difficulty of addressing these issues when biological sex is disavowed. UK anthropologist Kathleen Richardson's abstract highlighted issues surrounding material disparities between the sexes in the tech industry that are being erased by counting men who identify as trans as women, rather than having more women enter the field. Francophone Canadian anthropologist Michelle Sirois? I don't know how to pronounce the name. Was to author an ethnographic account of the ways in which Quebec feminists have organized to document, clarify, and oppose the exploitative surrogacy industry that hides under the guise of equity and inclusion, and in which surrogacy policies which exploit poor women are cynically framed as liberatory. So in other words, there was going to be a lot of great discussion on some controversial topics. And it could have been a great place to have some great open debate. And basically, it seems like it got shut down because people were offended. Your suggestion that our panel would somehow compromise, quote, the scientific integrity of the program seems to us particularly egregious, as the decision to anathemize our panel looks very much like an anti-science response to a politicized lobbying campaign. Had our panel been allowed to go forward, we can assure you that lively contestation would have been welcomed by the panelists and may have even occurred between us, as our own political commitments are diverse. Instead, your letter expresses the alarming hope that the AAA and Casca will become more unified within each of our associations to avoid future debates. And this is actually the organizers and all the panelists, it would seem, right here. Most disturbingly, following other organizations such as the Society for American Archaeology, the AAA and Casca have promised that going forward, we will undertake a major review of the processes associated with vetting sessions at our annual meetings and will include our leadership in that discussion. Anthropologists around the world will quite rightly find chilling this declaration of war on dissent and on scholarly controversy. It is a profound betrayal of the AAA's principle of advancing human understanding and applying this understanding to the world's most pressing problems. Now, that is the 2 arguments there, and of course, actually, Colin also has in here what the presentation was going to be about, the whole session here in its full thing, but unfortunately, it was all shut down because because folks got upset, is what it seems like, in here anyway. And so, look, I can understand there's really strongly passionate feelings about this kind of thing. That isn't, to me, it is not about what my own opinion is on this. It's a question of whether or not it is right to cancel a session like this because people get offended at the topic matter. And the immediate answer from me is no. It is absolutely not right to do that. And why is that? We're talking about scientific disciplines. Anthropology being one of them, archaeology being one of them, go down the list. What is the purpose of science as a whole? To get at the truth. But to do that, under that organized skepticism principle, you must have contesting viewpoints. You must have viewpoint diversity. And so to disallow something because someone gets offended is basically choking the funnel at the top. So only certain ideas are allowed to even be discussed. And as a result of that, you end up with what? Only certain things being allowed to be discussed, only certain things being allowed in peer review and research and what have you, and only certain things being allowed to be discussed at scientific conferences. And frankly, it creates ideologically based blind spots. In other words, how can we know necessarily sometimes that things are basically getting at the truth with a project if you can't talk about it? This is actually the prime problem here, and that's why I bring this up, is that this kind of thing is a concern. This kind of thing is really a concern. So I just note it for the one thing here, and I would consider it carefully that, this is actually really bad, and I would go back to the Chicago statement one more time to remind you. Of course, the ideas of different members of the university community will often and quite naturally conflict, but it is not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas or opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. Although the university greatly values civility, and although all members of the university community share in the responsibility for maintaining a climate of mutual respect, concerns about civility and mutual respect can never be used as a justification for closing off discussion of ideas, however offensive or disagreeable those ideas may be to some members of our community. Let me read that again, but I'm actually going to change the word university here. And probably university community. Of course, the ideas of different members of a professional society will often and quite naturally conflict. But it is not the proper role of the professional society to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. Although the professional society greatly values civility, and although members of the professional society share in the responsibility for maintaining a climate of mutual respect, concerns about civility and mutual respect can never be used as a justification for closing off discussion of ideas, however offensive or disagreeable those ideas may be to some members of our community. With that, I'm going to say idea of the day for all the scientists and folks listening who might be thinking about stuff like this, the academic freedom kind of thing. I think it's about time we started lobbying for said Princeton principles or Chicago statement to show up and be enforced by professional societies. Time to take that step too. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.